Well, the question of death is, of course, very essential for Dharma practice. First of all, personally, to prepare oneself for dying, the process of leaving this body, going beyond into the unknown. We usually call this dying. From the Buddhist perspective, there is no dying. There is the leaving of this body and continuing in consciousness without a body. So there is a time immediately after the separation of the body, which is for most probably a blackout, and for others it's an experience of an incredible clear luminosity without a center, without me calling for attention. And then the habitual tendencies come back, and still without a body, consciousness begins to experience like in a dream at night. And then there are possibilities to stay just as a conscious stream of being, or to take up a body again, and so on. So yes, Buddhist practice is a lot about making good use of this transition time and preparing ourselves for it, losing all fear of what might happen by knowing our own mind. So the biggest preparation is now, as we are in this body, in this life, to get to know how our mind works, so that we are not actually going towards the unknown when we leave the body. We're actually going into the familiar dimension of just being. I would say that's, and some masters, they would say the whole purpose of the path is to prepare for that. And others would play it low-key because they don't want to trigger people's doubts about rebirth and what happens after leaving this body, so they play it low-key and don't overstate that aspect of preparing for this important transition. Earlier Buddhists, later Buddhists, Southern Buddhism, Northern Buddhism, Tibetan, Chinese, Japanese, they all report the same experiences. There has been a little trouble with the time spans allocated to how long does each sequence, each phase in the transition last, and this is mostly due to trying to impose our idea of time on what happens in the mind stream after leaving this body, and not being bound by breathing cycles, not being bound by the rising and setting of the sun, and all of this is irrelevant for mind, for the consciousness after leaving this body. So difficult to calculate times, and the various propositions of how to describe that are actually about how long can a person maintain clear presence and not be fooled by one's own dreamlike appearances after leaving this body. So that continuity of presence was called one day. So for some of us well-trained, this could be very long. And for some of us not so well-trained, this could be very short. Could be like this, one day would be maybe 10 minutes or something. Yeah, things can happen fast and slowly. Yeah. But otherwise, they all agree, and they are actually able to describe this in great detail. So very reliable, also even to the point that some masters have been really successful in predicting their own rebirth and how to get there, which place, which family, at which time, and so on, and mastering the whole transition. So there's a lot of insight into that. Dharma practice does not depend on that belief. It's not necessary to believe that. Since the Buddha's time, the Buddha always said, if you believe in rebirth, fine, then practice like that. If you don't believe in rebirth, also practice like that, because it's even good for this life. So he left it perfectly open, and it was not mandatory to believe in it. And it's never mandatory. You don't become a Buddhist practitioner because you believe in rebirth. There are some who don't. So really, that's up to everybody. It was also true for me that for many years I wasn't sure about all of what was being said about the time after death, after leaving this body. And I was in an intermediate position, you could say. There were a lot of other areas in my practice where I could see that these women and men who were the practitioners before us, that they were not lying. They were actually describing things as they are, and I could experience it. Even often I would find the description of what I lived afterwards. So it's not always like you know it before and then you make it up. So there is no reason why they should be speculating or telling stories about something which they don't know. They are not this kind of people, that's one thing. Then, personally, I knew some Westerners who had direct experiences of being able to communicate with mind streams after they have left the body, with very precise informations from their previous life and indications about people and places and what to do and what was on their mind and so on. And that was the second dimension outside of the Buddhist tradition. These people I'm talking about were not necessarily Buddhists. I met them in different continents, here in Europe and in Southern America and in India. And then came a point in my own practice, it must have been in the 5th year of continuous retreat, where my dream yoga practice was to a point that I could experience out-of-body experiences and developed a great certainty of this stream of consciousness being able to function without the need for a body. There had been other experiences before, but this intimacy of body-mind always being together in this life, then for me was sure not to be a necessity. Mind does not depend on having the body in order to function like that. So that developed a personal certainty, conviction due to my increasing familiarity of how mind actually is. How it is when one is in a deep sleep, has no sensory awareness and so on, all of that, what happens then.